Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started, even though I'm the only one in the room. This is chapter 4. We're talking about pharmaceuticals and the neurotransmitters. The first neurotransmitter that they discovered was acetylcholine. It's contained in the cholinergic nerve cells, and the area that it comes from has to do with the nucleus basalis, the medial septal nucleus in the basal forebrain, in the basal forebrain. So it's right in this area here. These are cholinergic cells. They project to the hippocampus and the amygdala to promote memory. The amygdala, of course, has to do more with emotion, and the hippocampus, of course, is the seat of memory. Cells in this area are often destroyed in Alzheimer's disease, and that's the reason why they lose their memory. And it's also why they have they tend to have outbursts of extreme emotion for one reason or another. And actually, these cells are degenerating. The acetylcholine producing cells are degenerating, and for that reason, of course, you get some extreme reactions. Sometimes they'll have memories of things that they haven't been able to think of for an extended length of time, and of course that has to do with the hippocampus, and the emotions have to do with the amygdala. The drug atropine, which is used to dilate your eyes, if you've ever had your eyes dilated, or scopolamine, which is truth serum, are both acetylcholine antagonists. They block acetylcholine, and for that reason, you can't control what you say with scopolamine. Now, the interesting thing about scopolamine, over the summer, my wife had hip surgery, and one of the drugs that they gave her was scopolamine, which I found kind of interesting. And I was teasing her that it was as they were wheeling her into surgery, that all I needed to do was ask her poignant questions at that point, and I would hear the truth. Of course, she doesn't really have anything to hide, so this scopolamine didn't work for me. Pedunculopontine nucleus in the laterodorsal tegmental nucleus control sleep and our cholinergic cells as well. As we said before, acetylcholine allows you to go to sleep, and this is the reason it does. There are two main types of acetylcholine receptors, and the reason that we call them nicotinic and muscarinic is because of the poisons that affect them. Nicotine, of course, is a poison in large dosages. And muscarinic, of course, is from the mushroom, and if you take too much of either one of these, they will kill you, of course. Nicotine you can use as a murder weapon. Usually, when they're looking for drugs that might potentially be a murder weapon or whatever, they usually don't look for nicotine. So potentially you could use nicotine to kill somebody, especially if they're a non-smoker. Nicotinic receptors are ionotropic and have excitatory functions, and that's one of the reasons why nicotine, when you smoke or when you chew tobacco, and this is one of the reasons why baseball players have been using tobacco for an extended length of time, is because when they are playing ball, they need to be as alert as possible, and the nicotinic receptors are ionotropic, so they act very rapidly, and they're also excitatory. So you get your best performance when you're chewing tobacco or smoking a cigarette or whatever. Muscarinic receptors are metabotropic and can be excitatory or inhibitory. There are 5 transmitters classified as monoamines in 2 groups. The 2 groups are catecholamines and indolamines. Catecholamines include norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine. The indolamines include serotonin and melatonin, Melatonin, of course, is the neurotransmitter that accumulates and allows you to go to sleep at night. Serotonin, of course, has to do with depression. The catecholamines, dopamine, these all have to do with excitation, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine. We'll talk about neurotransmitters. Did you fix your drink?
It was the seal. The seal.
The seal was?
You know, the rubber seal.
Oh, yuck.
You know how it gets stuck in that gap there? So
It's okay now.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
I cleaned it out.
That was pretty nasty smell.
Mm-hmm.
And exciting at the same time.
Yeah.
Dopamine is one of the most abundant transmitters in your brain. It is found all over the brain, but two of the more important areas are the mesostriatal system and the mesolimbic cortical system, and both of those are right here. One is in front of the other. The mesostriatal system includes the substantia nigra to the striatum, caudate, and the putamen. This area of the brain does not actually have very many nerve cells, so what nerves there are can control thousands of synapses. The mesostriatal system is extremely important. If this area degenerates, then the individual develops Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease, of course, is where you can't control your hands. You've got tremors to the point of paralysis, where you can't actually move your hands. I had a colleague at Ashford who was starting to suffer from Parkinsonian symptoms. He may have Parkinson's disease, maybe not. Maybe he has other degenerative problems, but he shook all the time, just his hands. So when he tried to write, of course you couldn't read his handwriting. It was really kind of interesting. At one point he came down with the flu. He wasn't eating very well. And he came down with the flu because his nutrition wasn't very good. And I was the one, they called me to see if I could help him. And of course he was vomiting, of course, but that wasn't the biggest problem. The biggest problem was he couldn't control, not only could he not control his hands, but he couldn't control his neck. His neck muscles had started to have tremors in them as well. So one of the things that we had to do was lay him down to help him control his muscles, because his muscles were all twitching.
So what does that actually cause from? Is it just aging?
What, you mean
aging?
Parkinsonian symptoms? Yeah, well, there's a lot of different reasons you can get Parkinsonian symptoms. It does have to do with aging, and people do tend to be less steady as they get older. But also, if you've ever used any amphetamines, cocaine, if you've used drugs, even marijuana, which people think is not very destructive, marijuana can cause the same problems. Opiates, of course, will cause the same problems. Frequent blows to the head, like for a boxer or a football player, very often they will develop Parkinsonian symptoms. Muhammad Ali, for the last 20 or 30 years of his life, had Parkinson's disease, and it was boxing related. Looking at his brain, you could see that the middle of his brain was slowly getting larger and larger and larger. The empty area in his brain was getting larger and larger and larger. So we don't have very many dopamine producing cells, and this is can be kind of a problem. People will get into their 80s, 90s, and hundreds without any Parkinsonian symptoms. Other individuals will start developing Parkinsonian symptoms in their 40s, and it really all depends on what kind of garbage you've been putting in your body. People that smoke are more likely to have Parkinsonian symptoms. I had a friend that just died last year. He was 2 years younger than I was. And the last 4 or 5 years of his life, he had a real difficult time with. He was a smoker, and he really didn't do very much else. I guess he smoked a little bit of pot, and he drank a lot. He drank to some extent, but it was mostly the cigarettes that caused the problem. So any poisons, nicotine, of course, is a poison, as I said before, so you need to be careful of these things. There's the area of the brain that we're talking about, this area right here. And now we're going to talk about the mesolimbocortical system. This area is in front of the mesostriatal area. This area projects into the limbic system, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the nucleus accumbens. So it has to do with emotion and memory. Overstimulation of this area in the dopamine pathways seem to cause schizophrenia. So whereas not enough dopamine causes Parkinson's disease, too much dopamine causes, or not too much dopamine, but too many dopamine receptor sites will cause schizophrenia. There are 5 types of dopamine receptors that have been identified, and because we have a brilliant scientific system of naming, they named them D1, D2, D3, D4, D5 are the names. D1 and D5 react in a similar manner, but very much different from D2, D3, and D4. So as we said before, dopamine is one of the most abundant neurotransmitters in the brain, and it comes from very few areas in the brain. That's the strange part. We have all this dopamine, but it's not being produced by very many areas. If it were being produced in more than the substantia nigra and that area in the forebrain, in the brainstem, if it were being produced in more areas, then potentially Parkinson's disease would not be as prevalent. But it is. Antipsychotic drugs work on the D2 receptor sites. And because of that, we assume that schizophrenia has something to do with the D2 receptor sites, too many D2 receptor sites. If we can block the D2 receptor sites, then the schizophrenic symptoms will go away. And so that's usually what the medication that people are taking for risperidone, thorazine, all of those drugs are reducing the amount of D2 receptor sites that are available. So this has something to do with stimulation, the D2 receptor sites. So as you were walking from the parking lot into the building, you were getting all the stimulation. You were going to the elevator. You pushed the button. All of these things. You were not only were you walking, but you were also smelling whatever it smelled like. You were hearing all the construction noise. You were seeing everything that was taking place. All of this information is being processed through in your brain, of course, and the D2 receptor sites have something to do with that.
D2, okay.
D2, yeah, D2 as compared to D1, D3, D4, D5. So it's the D2 receptor sites. So if you have too many of those receptor sites, if you have these receptor sites looking for stimulation, then potentially they're going to find stimulation that doesn't really exist. And that's what causes schizophrenia. You're getting information that isn't really there. You're seeking information. So now here's the bizarre part. When people have schizophrenia, they feel like they're getting information that other people aren't. And the reality is they are. But the question is it real information or is it their brain making things up? And the answer is it's their brain making things up. But they can't tell the difference. They're, hallucinations and delusions. So they have no idea that they're not getting correct information. I mean, there's no way to tell whether these messages you're getting from outer space are real or are they a figment of your imagination. And the answer is they're a figment of your imagination. You have no way of knowing. I mean, if there was actually information coming from outer space and you could detect it, how would you know that you weren't insane? I mean, that's the problem. And of course, these guys are almost positive because the information is there. I mean, it's right there, and they're getting it. They're detecting it, and it's like they're super beings. At least that's in their own imaginations. They're super beings. Anyway, so that's schizophrenia and dopamine. Norepinephrine is released from 3 different areas in the brainstem. The impact of the neurons producing norepinephrine expands broadly throughout the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord. Norepinephrine primarily gives you a feeling of a capability. You feel like you can do just about anything. It makes you feel good. So one of the things that in the old days, we would try to increase your norepinephrine level if you were depressed. And that would make you feel better, make you feel like you're on top of the world, which is a good thing. So that's what norepinephrine does. Norepinephrine is released when you are in the fight or flight response. And the reason is so that you will face the enemy or face the challenge with a positive attitude. And it's norepinephrine that gives you that positive attitude. So if we can increase your norepinephrine level, your depression will go away, which is kind of exciting. And that's primarily what it does. It makes you feel like you can do something. You can come in, that's okay. This transmitter is believed to be to affect a broad range of behavioral and physiological functions. As I said, it makes you feel like you're capable, like you can handle just about anything. So potentially, if you've got an individual that every time something happens, they sneak away someplace, potentially they have too low a norepinephrine level, or their body's not releasing norepinephrine properly. Normally, when a danger approaches someone, they have the fight or flight response. They have all this adrenaline that's pumping through their system, telling them that the adrenaline is making them able to face the problem, but it's the norepinephrine that makes them want to face the problem. Okay. So the adrenaline actually gives you strength. People who are facing some kind of crisis. Once upon a time, there was a fire on an aircraft carrier in the China Sea, and the aircraft carrier was servicing Vietnam. And there was a fire. And I don't know if you heard the story, but some people blame John McCain for the fire. He didn't have anything to do with it, but it was a good story. And people that didn't like John McCain, it was a detracting story. So there was this fire. Well, they had all these bombs on the deck of the aircraft carrier, waiting to be loaded onto the aircraft, and so that they could take off and bomb North Vietnam or South Vietnam, or whoever they were bombing. Anyway, so they had these bombs, and some of the bombs were, and they were different weights. There was 100-pound bombs, or 250-pound bombs, 500-pound bombs, and 1,000-pound bombs. So there were a number of these out there, and there was only one guy out there. And the fire was getting closer and closer. And he picked up the 100-pound bombs and dumped them over the side without any problem. Then he went over and picked up the 250-pound bombs and dumped them over the side. Then he went over and picked up the 500-pound bombs and dumped them over the side. He couldn't pick up the 1,000-pound bombs, so he rolled it over to the side and dumped it over. One guy. Weighed about 130 pounds. Now, probably, and these are bombs, so they're egg-shaped. They're not. Right. There's no handles on them. All right. And he was able to pick those things up. He was able to pick up a bomb that was 3 times heavier than he was.
Yeah. Wow.
Now, how did he do that? The answer was adrenaline.
Adrenaline, because he wanted to save his life.
Well, he saved everybody's life. I mean, if those bombs had gone off, they potentially would have destroyed the aircraft carrier. But he was able to dispose of all the bombs that were on the deck. Serotonin is classified as an indolamine, a subclassification of monoamines. Large areas of the brain are controlled by serotonin producing neurons, so serotonin is extremely important. Serotonin makes us feel good, or it can make us feel good. The problem is that we don't have a whole lot of cells in our brain that are releasing serotonin. Most of them are down here in the brainstem. They're known as the raphe nucleus, these cells that release serotonin. Some people have more of these than others. Some people don't get depressed. Other individuals, of course, have a really serious problem with this. They have a real serious problem with serotonin. Serotonin does a ton of different things. It controls a lot of stuff. It affects a lot of different things. One of the things that it affects is, I guess that's on the next page. We'll talk about what it affects next time. 15 types of serotonin receptors have been identified, so there's just tons of different types of receptors in there. It's not there.
So
What-
what would it cause, what would cause it for not to, you know, to have a lot of that? Is it neurons you were saying?
It's genes. Your genes.
Oh,
You either have lots or you don't have lots.
Oh,
Just a little bit.
just.
The reality is that most of us have enough. Most people aren't depressed. But you may know a family where everybody seems to be grouchy, they're never happy, there's no smiling. Some of it is probably environmental, but some of it may be genetic. We see whole families like this, whole genetic structures of individuals that don't really respond very well to life's problems. Okay. For some reason, I'm not talking. One of the, and I don't know if it's later on in the chapter, but one of the things that it controls is your sex drive. And the reason it controls your sex drive is because it tempers testosterone. Your sex drive comes from testosterone and the hypothalamus. And so the more serotonin you have, the more controlled your sex drive is. Okay. Which is kind of interesting because if you take a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, one of the things that you're doing is you're increasing your serotonin level and therefore you're decreasing your sex drive. So a lot of people complain about it. A lot of people will go off the serotonin reuptake inhibitors because it's destroying their libido. They have no desire to have sex, and that bothers them. So they'll go off of the substance, of the medication. And of course, that's one of the problems with that medication is that is one of the side effects. Now, not everybody has the same side effects. But then again, and I think we've talked about this before, how much sex are you supposed to have anyway? Who made that rule? Who do you have to ask to get that information? And the answer is there's nobody to ask. Even if you ask a doctor, he can't come up with a number. Well, if you're not having sex at least 3 times a week, then there's something wrong with you. Nobody's going to tell you that. If you're not having sex at least 3 times a year, then there's something. Nobody's going to tell you that. I mean, it has to do with individual couples as to what is normal and what is not normal, or what is considered normal and what is considered not normal. One of the problems is reproduction. How often do you have to have sex in order to reproduce? And the answer is once, if it's at the right time. If it's not at the right time, you better do it more, okay? So if that's the question, that's another question that has to be asked. We deal with this, well, in medicine you deal with this from time to time. We had to deal with it when I was in the service because we had pilots that weren't able to reproduce. And it didn't have anything to do with the frequency of their reproduction. It had to do with the fact that they were flying jet airplanes and they were flying them really, really fast. And they were pulling G's, and the G's were they were affecting their sperm. And because of that, they had a very difficult time. They had more difficulty reproducing. But this is back in the 70s. Back in the 70s, the sperm counts were 60% higher than they are today. They were much. The average sperm count was much, much higher than it is today. It was 210% higher. The sperm counts today that we see are less than half of what they were back in the 1970s.
And why is that?
We're not exactly sure. There's a lot of different reasons that sperm counts can go down. Environment, of course.
What people eat?
The food that people eat, the substances we put in food to preserve them, preservatives.
Chemicals.
What's another problem? Marijuana is a problem. Marijuana causes, it decreases you, not only does it decrease your sperm count, but it also creates more abnormal forms. We're not at the point of crisis yet, but we're kind of starting to worry about people not being able to reproduce. People are also having smaller families than they were in the past. And this was, they first started looking at sperm counts in the 70s, and the reason they started looking at sperm counts was because of those pilots. They were only able to make girl babies, and they couldn't understand, they all wanted boy babies, but they got what they got. And the reason had to do with pulling Gs. Well, we're not all pulling Gs, that's not the problem, but the sperm counts are going down, and we're not exactly sure. I mean, people can speculate, but nobody really knows for sure. So how do you increase your sperm count? You can't. There's nothing you can do. The sperm counts the normal sperm counts we have today, we would have considered abnormally low before. As strange as that may seem. And this, people are only starting to even think about this because we don't talk about this kind of stuff. Nobody talks about this kind of stuff except lab techs and doctors and people that can't reproduce. So frequency doesn't have a whole lot to do with it. It has to do with the male sperm count. In the old days, a male could produce as many as 1 billion sperm per ejaculate. Not anymore. Now he's producing maybe 300 million per ejaculation. But not only is the sperm count per mil going down, but also the amount of ejaculate is decreasing. We're not sure why. Could it have to do with pornography? Could it have to do with the fact that we're sitting so much now before we were moving around and standing around? I don't know. I have no idea.
You have a lot of stuff, even what you eat and exercising.
Sure.
All of that, I think it could be psychological too.
Could be psychological. Well, probably not, because this is something people don't think about. And it's certainly something nobody talks about. I won't go into that. They noticed, what did they notice? People have talked about this in the past, but not very much. But what they talked about was certain individuals would have larger families. And what they discovered was that an average or below average sized man would have larger families than a tall man. So the really tall people didn't have very many families, but didn't have very many children. So you don't see any 7-footers having 9 or 10 kids. I know. But of course that's something else that nobody talks about. Does it have anything to do with sperm count? I don't know. Does it have to do with frequency of intercourse? I don't know. But this, these are all questions that nobody wants to ask because it's embarrassing. Nobody wants to talk about this stuff, and that's okay. Until we can't make any more babies, and then everybody's going to be upset. We should have started dealing with this back in 1980 when we first started noticing the sperm counts were going down. And then everybody's going to be going, oh well, why didn't the doctors tell us about this? Amino acids as transmitters. Some amino acids act as transmitters. excitatory amino acids, glutamate and aspartate. Glutamate is the most common excitatory neurotransmitter in your brain. Glutamate is. Inhibitory amino acids, gamma-aminobutyric acid. It's the most common inhibitory transmitter in your brain, and also glycine. It's GABA that we use to control anxiety. If you have anxiety, one of your problems is that you don't have enough GABA, especially if it's anxiety that doesn't make any sense. Panic attacks, for example. Panic attacks just hit you, and sometimes they don't have anything to do with the environment. They just hit. Why in the world did that happen? Well, it's probably because you don't have enough GABA. So what do they do what do they do to control that? They give you medication that increases your GABA level, and then your anxiety goes down. We used to try to control anxiety with Valium. Valium. And then we realized, wait a minute, all we're doing is sedating these people. All we're doing is knocking these people out. Not only that, but Valium is very addictive. Diazepam is the chemical name for it. But we don't do that anymore. Now we try to increase the GABA level, and that usually takes care of things. Xanax increases your GABA level.
And I had an episode when I was flying out, kind of maybe a panic attack, because we were flying out, and then the plane was leaving, and it was, you know how it takes off, and it started shaking, and I panicked. So would that mean that I don't have enough? I mean, I just thought.
No, you were scared. I wouldn't call it panic, I'd call it scared. You were scared because this is a feeling that you've never felt before.
Mm-hmm.
And you thought maybe the airplane was skewing sideways, and the wheels were causing the plane to vibrate, and that you were going to crash.
Mm-hmm.
You had a reason.
Oh.
You had a reason.
Okay.
Panic attack is where there's
No.
no reason whatsoever. It just happens.
Even when you're like in a closed area, because like a claustrophobic.
Sure.
You just have a panic attack. Is that
That's a possibility. But there once again, you have a reason. You have to analyze every situation.
Right.
Find out why it happened. Why was I scared? Was there a reason for me to be scared? And if there was no reason for you to be scared, that's a panic attack. Or generalized anxiety disorder, GAD.
Anxiety?
Yeah, generalized anxiety disorder. It's where there's no reason for you to have a reaction, but you do have a reaction. It usually has to do with a decreased amount of GABA. And all we need to do is increase your GABA. Or even if there's a reason for it, we can give you GABA and you will not react to the situation as negative. Now sometimes you need to panic. If a herd of elephants is running toward you, you probably need to get out of the way. So you need to go. You need to go, oh my God, I'm going to be run down by elephants. I need to run away. Well, the truth is, if you run the same direction the elephants are running, they're going to run you down. So you need to run it at a 90-degree angle where they're coming to get away from them. Anyway, so you have to think. Glutamate uses both ionotropic receptors and metabotropic receptors. The ionotropic receptors are AMPA receptors. AMPA receptors are able to increase with learning, accelerating the processing function. So it's AMPA that teaches you when you need to attain a select piece of information. It's AMPA that allows you to do that. Otherwise, you'd be like a chimpanzee. You can show a chimpanzee how to do something, and then you have to show them again because they didn't remember it. But as humans, especially if it's something very important, if it's something that causes an emotional reaction, AMPA is one of the receptor sites that is teaching us that this is what has to happen next time. AMPA. Kainate receptors, NMDA receptors involve information processing. So the AMPA receptors teach us, the NMDA receptors allow us to process that information. So AMPA and NMDA are both receptors, ionotropic receptors that allow us to learn something. And we learn it very fast. A good example would be combat. First time rounds come in, bullets come zipping through your area, you may be curious to see where they're coming from. Probably the wrong reaction. And then somebody will grab you and pull you down and make you get your head down, otherwise you're going to get killed. The next time bullets come zipping through your area, that's the first thing you do. You remember it because the AMPA has taught it to you, and the NMDA has allowed you to process this information. So now you know it. After saving that young lady the other day now. I understand you stayed with her until the security came?
Yeah.
Well, that was nice of you. Glutamate has a feature known as excitotoxicity, whereby a neuron is depolarized due to injury or stroke. It will die. Glutamate is cleared by astrocytes. So if the glutamate receptor site dies, if the neuron that utilizes it, the glutamate dies, then an astrocyte will take care of it. And it has excitotoxicity. Now what does that mean? That means if you're in a very dangerous situation on a continuous basis and these negative things continue to happen to you, you're going to lose this capability. Okay. And we see this with individuals who have been in prolonged combat. We saw this during World War II. We saw this during World War I in individuals that had been under artillery barrages for extended lengths of time. They got what they called, what did they call it? It was combat fatigue in World War II. It was, what did they call it? Anyway, these individuals, they'd have to pull them off the line because they couldn't function anymore. And the reason is because they had lost, because of excitotoxicity, they had lost this capability to function under those conditions. The neurons that told them to stay there and to wait until the barrage was over with, those neurons died because of excitotoxicity. Now these neurons will grow back. We'll get them back eventually. Not all of them, some of them. And this may have something to do with PTSD, why we have PTSD. Because all of a sudden we don't have the capability of reacting properly to a stressful situation. And this is one of the reasons, if you've ever been around somebody with PTSD, this may be one of the reasons that if they get into a situation that is potentially dangerous, they just walk away because they can't react to it anymore. They've lost that capability. Or at least they feel like they've lost that capability. GABA receptors can be divided into three types, A, B, and C. GABA receptors contain chloride channels and they are ionotropic. GABA-B receptors are metabotropic. GABA-C receptors are ionotropic, just like GABA receptors are, but they have a different function. Drugs that block the action of GABA can cause seizures, and this is one of the problems with taking drugs to block GABA. It causes seizures. shell shock, that's what it was. That's what they call it, shell shock, during World War I. And some of these individuals, if they heard a loud noise, they would they jump under a chair. And there are films of these individuals reacting to negative situations. They'd hide under their bunks. A lot of times they would go to sleep at night, and when they woke up in the morning, they were underneath their bunk. Because when a shell hits, you don't have any time to react to it. So these individuals were going to sleep, even though there was no artillery in the area, they weren't being fired at. They would go to sleep, and they would automatically get under their bunk just in case something happened. And they would do it while they were asleep, so it was like sleepwalking. And they have films of these individuals reacting negatively to things. Now, the sad part was that you could come up behind them and clap your hands, and they would hit the dirt, and they'd start shaking.
It's like that movie, is it that American Shooter? Is that where at the end he's?
Is that about Chris Kyle?
I think it is.
Did he have the same problem?
Is it American Shooter or
American Sniper?
He was in a sniper, yeah.
Yeah. So he had the same problem?
At the end, yeah. Towards the end, because he went in so many times, he went to tour like I think 3 or 4 times. And then at the end, he just like wasn't like little noise. He would get irritated by it, like
Right.
or he would get upset like that.
You could always tell somebody who had been to Vietnam because they couldn't stand select noises. One of the noises was a vacuum cleaner. So if they couldn't run a vacuum cleaner themselves, but if there was a vacuum cleaner in the area, I was working at a school. This was in 1990, in the 1990s, and whenever they came in and vacuumed the floor, you'd have a bunch of guys who go outside. They couldn't be in the building when the vacuum cleaner was running. There's something about the vacuum cleaner. It's that whiny, constant noise. The other thing is helicopters. I can't stand helicopters. Who can, right?
This happens to anybody, not just vets.
Yeah, it can happen to anybody, I guess. Potentially it could. Yeah, if they were under stress over an extended length of time.
My wife's cousin, he sleepwalks. I didn't know that. He slept over one time. And I was on the laptop, just illuminating just my face.
Sure.
I kept seeing him. He says he doesn't go to sleep. I just kept seeing him walking back to the refrigerator and back to the TV. And I thought, when I'm coming to eat, I think he gets an early start tomorrow when he's up. And I just got off doing stuff. I was looking at him, asking him if it was okay. And I kept talking to him. He just didn't say anything, so I just left him alone. And the next morning, I got up and my wife told me, did so-and-so, did you see him all night? He goes, yeah. And they kind of started laughing. He was sleepwalking again last night. Did he go outside? He goes, no. I don't think so, because I went to sleep afterwards.
Do you know if there's a reason why he sleepwalks?
That's what he's having studies on him. He goes to several appointments, and they're doing studies with him just for sleepwalking. So he's a problem.
Okay. Did anything traumatic ever happen to him?
Yeah, possibly.
Okay. When he was a kid. Now he sleepwalks instead of stays in his bed. Okay. I guess there's a logic to that somewhere. So potentially he was molested, and the reason he sleepwalks is to stay out of bed. Because he was being molested in bed, and now that's how he protects himself. By sleepwalking.
It's possible out there.
Yeah. But the other problem would be he's probably repressed the fact that he was molested. So if you ask him if he was, he probably can't tell you.
Yeah. We've asked several times and he don't remember or don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But he works in a facility where he has to work with mental health, so he's helping himself. I guess that's what he's actually like, I gotta help myself before I help that kind of.
Wow.
So
Okay. I hope it works.
Yeah, we sure do.
Peptides, many peptides have a prominent role in the brain as neurotransmitters. There are opioid peptides, endorphins, the enkephalins, and dynorphin. Those are the three opioid peptides. Endorphins, everybody knows what endorphins are. They are the endogenous painkillers. And it is the endorphin receptor sites that opiates attach themselves to. But there are also other painkillers, natural painkillers that we have in our bodies. Enkephalins are one of them, and dynorphins are the other. Substance P is also a peptide. Substance P, cholecystokinin, neurotensin, neuropeptide Y. These are all peptides. They're found in the gut, in your stomach, and your intestines, and your spinal cord. And of course, it's substance P that we try to block with analgesics. That's why ibuprofen works. That's why acetaminophen works. That's why aspirin works. They block substance P. Cholecystokinin has to do with your gallbladder. It's produced by your gallbladder. It allows you to digest fats. Neurotensin has to do with your blood pressure, controls your blood pressure. And neuropeptide Y has to do with glucose.
Glucose?
Glucose.
Sugar.
You have two pituitary hormones that are peptides, oxytocin and vasopressin. Vasopressin has to do with diuretics. It has to do with controlling your fluid in your body. Vasopressin. So if you spray somebody with vasopressin, you will start retaining water. So vasopressin allows you to accumulate fluids in your body and expel fluids from your body. So if you don't want somebody to urinate, you can give them vasopressin, and they won't urinate, and they won't collect urine either. And this is what we do with little boys that are wet the bed. You can spray vasopressin in their nose before they go to bed, and they won't wet the bed that night. I know. It's not very safe because you want people's kidneys to work to function properly,
Right.
and you want them to evacuate whenever they need to evacuate. But people that are really upset about their children wetting the bed, there is a spray that you can use to spray it up their nose. Oxytocin, on the other hand, oxytocin is a hormone that allows the woman to allows the milk to drop in her breasts. So when the baby cries, your oxytocin level increases, and you start producing milk. As a matter of fact, one of the things that can potentially happen when the baby starts crying, of course, the mother thinks, oh, I need to feed my baby, and all of a sudden milk will squirt out of her nipples. That happens sometimes. That's oxytocin. It also is supposed to make you, gives you the nesting reaction. When it makes you want to feel like a mother. If you're around somebody that's pregnant, a lot of times right before the end of their pregnancy, the oxytocin level will increase, and they'll start putting things away, and they'll start preparing for the baby to come. I mean, all of these nesting things. Of course, we're humans, so we don't nest, but we get the same kind of reaction. They have this mothering instinct hits them right there before they give birth. It also has to do with labor. Oxytocin increases. There are several things that increase. Oxytocin is one of them when you go into labor. And so it allows you to go into, it's one of the hormones that allows you to go into labor. With other animals, cats, dogs, gerbils, whatever, if you inject them with oxytocin, they will start nesting. They will start the nesting, the whole nesting procedure. I don't know if you've ever had a dog that was about to have puppies, but one of the things that they'll do is they'll crawl into a corner and they'll make it nice and warm, and they will be in a place where they can be protected, where they can't see the outside world and the outside world can't see them. They will nest. And so all you have to do is give them a shot of this stuff. Even if they're not pregnant, you can give them a shot of oxytocin and they'll start nesting. As odd as that may seem. Now the idea should be males have oxytocin as well. So they have this instinct to protect. And oxytocin gives them that instinct to protect. Neurotransmitters work on just select receptor sites that contain a receptor for that select neurotransmitter. And this is known as a lock and key. So it only works with this chemical structure. So serotonin only works with serotonin receptor sites. Serotonin is not going to attach itself to a GABA receptor site. The chemical structure is not right. So it's a lock and key situation. This can only work with this chemical structure. But of course, there are other chemical structures that are similar enough to the serotonin that we can also utilize this chemical to block that receptor site. Most neurotransmitters work on more than one receptor. For example, acetylcholine in muscles excites muscular activity, while in the vagal nerve it inhibits functioning of the heart and the digestive tract. So it does more than one thing. The neurotransmitters in the body are known as endogenous ligands, internally occurring ligands. Ligand just means receptor site, just so you can think of the receptor site as a ligand. Man-made drugs or exogenous ligands work because they either act as a neurotransmitter and excite or inhibit the neuron, or they block the action of the transmitter and keep it from affecting the neuron. So we can give you drugs that actually block those receptor sites. That's what we do with dopamine. If somebody has too many dopamine receptor sites, they're having schizophrenic episodes. We can give them a drug that will block those dopamine receptor sites, and it will keep them from having schizophrenic episodes. Some drug molecules bind to the receptor molecule for a long time, while others only for a short time. A drug with a high affinity for a receptor will stay with receptors longer, so less is needed to be effective. And of course, if you take a medication, sometimes it's a time release mechanism, and sometimes it's just a fast-acting, short-acting receptor. A good example would be nitroglycerin. Nitroglycerin, if you put it under your tongue, it only lasts for about 15 minutes. It acts very rapidly, and then it goes away. A drug with a low affinity for a receptor will require higher concentrations of the drug to be effective. If both a high and low affinity drug is present, the drug with a high affinity will interfere with the low affinity drug. And this is one of the reasons why the doctor wants to know exactly what you're taking. Don't keep anything from the doctor, because you may be taking a medication that interferes with the drug he's going to give you. So he has to know everything that you're taking. A lot of drugs will interfere with one another. Sometimes you'll get a synergistic effect. In other words, you take one drug and you have one reaction. You take the other drug, if you take it by itself, you have a reaction. But if you take them together, then you get a multiplication, not an additional, but a multiplication of symptoms. This is what happens with alcohol and barbiturates. If you take barbiturates by themselves, they put you to sleep. If you drink alcohol, it makes you tired. But if you put the two of them together, it kills you. Now wait a minute. the effect of one plus the effect of the other shouldn't be death. But instead of getting a 1 + 1 = 2 situation, you get a 1 × 15 and you get a 15 reaction. You get a 2 × 5 reaction, you get a 10, rather than a 1 + 1 = 2. Now all of a sudden you're dead. And that's happened over and over and over again because people don't realize that if they are taking a barbiturate and they take it with alcohol, then they're getting a multiplication of symptoms, of reaction. They're getting not symptom, but reaction. So sometimes drugs will interfere with one another, and sometimes they will, the effect is more a multiplication situation, synergistic effect. They call it synergistic effect. Agonists do the same job as a transmitter, and the antagonists block the job of the transmitter. So you may be taking a drug that, a good example would be taking amphetamines and barbiturates together. One excites you and the other slows things down. So if you take them together, what happens? We get no reaction at all, because one will cancel the other one out. It has interfered. They have antagonistic reactions to one another.
I've heard this, one of the drugs that did that thing on one of the celebrities, Heath Ledger, where he was taking something to make him sleep, while at the same time he was making something to
excite him, sure.
And I think that was really, that did a number on where
Exactly. Exactly. And then he woke up dead. Actually, didn't wake up at all. And he had all these drugs in his system, and everybody's going, wait a minute, why would you take this with this? If you do that, one cancels the other one out. A lot of people that take drugs aren't real smart. or while they're stoned on one drug, they think, well, I'd like this reaction, so they'll take another drug, but instead of getting that reaction, they either get a synergistic effect, or the two of them cancel each other out. So then they take another drug. And that seems to have been what was going on with Heath Ledger. He had just tons of stuff in his system. It didn't make any sense at all. It may be also what happened to, what was his name? The guy, the skinny little guy, country and western singer that crossed over, the Heartbreakers. What was the guy's name? He had 3 different types of fentanyl in his system. Tom Petty, yeah. And the Heartbreakers, yeah. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Yeah. He had 3 different types of fentanyl in his system. Fentanyl is one of the strongest drugs on the market. And he had 3 different types in his system. For 3 different types of pain. So I guess he was hurting everywhere, so he took, anyway, he's dead. Sorry about that. Some drugs bind the receptor and make the receptor do the opposite of what they were intended to do. For example, inhibit to excite or excite to inhibit. And these drugs are called inverse agonists. And that's really one of the reasons why people take cocktails of drugs. They're trying to get an inverse effect. The reality is that barbiturates slow everything down. So if you take a barbiturate, how in the world are you going to get high? And this is why it works. If you take a barbiturate, usually people take a barbiturate to fall asleep. But if you take a barbiturate, fight through the fatigue that it causes, then it makes you high. And that's what people try to do. That's why they take barbiturates. What is there's a drug, what am I thinking of? It's the stuff in cough syrup. And what these people will do, it usually knocks you out. Dextromethorphan. And it normally will knock you out. It's a cough syrup, so it's supposed to put you to sleep. But what people will do is they'll go to a nightclub and they'll drink a whole bottle of cough syrup, which is like 15 times the amount you're supposed to take, and then they'll dance. And of course, instead of it putting them to sleep, they fight through the sleepy part, and then all of a sudden they're just stoned out of their gourds. Now the problem is, if you drink alcohol with your cough syrup, and all of a sudden you've got a synergistic effect, and they're dead. They just die right there on the dance floor. And this has happened over and over and over again. Because it was a big deal. I mean, it was suddenly, some rapper talked about drinking cough syrup at a nightclub, and so everybody's trying it, you know. But of course he didn't say, but please don't drink alcohol, you know. How do you rap that? I don't know. So all these people were dying. They were dying on the dance floor, as horrible as that sounds. Some drugs bind to the receptor in a place that does not bind the transmitter. When the transmitter binds to the receptor, the drug does not allow the transmitter to activate the neuron. Since the drug does not bind in the transmitter receptor site, it is called a non-competitive antagonist. So you have all these receptor sites. You have all of these places where the chemicals can attach themselves. Sometimes a chemical will attach itself to a non-receptor site, and if it does that, it will stop the neuron from firing, and that is known as a non-competitive antagonist. Drugs that act in a similar manner but activate the neuron are known as non-competitive agonists, and so we have all kinds of interesting drugs out there, and they do all kinds of interesting things, and this is one of the reasons why we take the medications that we do. I take blood pressure medicine, and the type of blood pressure medicine that I take is a non-competitive agonist. So it will attach itself to a non-receptor site, and it will slow the neuron down. And that's what's supposed to happen. Theoretically, I have high blood pressure, and I should be dead. They keep telling me that, but I haven't died yet. The drug reserpine, which acts as a sedative and an antihypertensive, inhibits the storage of catecholamine transmitters, dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine in the vesicles. So since it reduces the amount of dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, all of these are excitatory neurotransmitters. Since it inhibits the storage of these substances, now when something really exciting happens, if you're taking this medication, you don't overreact to it. You don't get excited. You don't go into a fight or flight response because it has blocked the dopamine, which makes you excited, the epinephrine, which also makes you excited, and the norepinephrine makes you feel like you can conquer the world, which raises your blood pressure, which normally would raise your blood pressure. But since it won't allow those things to accumulate, now if a stressful situation occurs, you don't stress out. You don't have the same reaction that you did before. And since we've lowered your blood pressure, now theoretically you won't have a heart attack. That's what they hope anyway. Colchicine is an anti-inflammatory and a painkiller used on gout. It works because it blocks the maintenance of microtubules and axonal transport. So the microtubules are what's feeding the neuron. The microtubules and the axonal transport feeds the neuron. And since it won't allow that to happen, these neurons that are causing all this pain, they are numb. They don't function properly. So now you don't have the same pain you had before. Colchicine. I have gout. I've had gout since I was 18 years old. But I control it with my diet. There are things that cause gout and things that if you eat them, then you will have an outbreak. One of those things is fish. Fish have purines in them, and purines cause people to have a reaction. What gout is an accumulation of uric acid crystals in your joints. So what we need to do in order to control gout is to control the amount of uric acid you have in your system. And you can do that by eating the right foods. don't eat any purines because purines break down into uric acid. So that's what I do. I don't eat select foods. I don't eat fish, for example. I don't drink alcohol, which has purines in it, especially beer and wine. I guess I could drink whiskey,
It's water.
but it tastes like crap, so why in the world would I do that? Anyway, so I've been able to control my gout by controlling the foods that I eat. However, I also have kidney stones. And the reason I have kidney stones is because I consume too many dairy products. Dairy products have calcium in them. So if I drink too much milk, which I don't drink milk anymore, but if I used to drink it by the gallon, I'd have kidney stones. Then one time I decided, I read this story about people who eat yogurt live longer than everybody else. So I decided, well, I think I'll try that and see what happens. And I started eating yogurt and I started having kidney stones. So I stopped doing that. Now the only dairy that I take in is cheese. Okay. Yeah. If I'm ever a bad boy, then I have kidney stones. I don't know if none of you, if you've ever had kidney stones, extremely painful. Most painful thing you can possibly imagine. Women who have had kidney stones and given birth have said, well, the kidney stones are a little bit worse. The pain is more intense. Well, I've never had a baby, so I can't tell you. But I can tell you the kidney stones hurt like they hurt a lot.
I had gallstones.
Not exactly the same thing, but really painful, isn't it?
Kidney stones?
Yeah, kidney stones are,
Oh, back there.
back there. My wife has had kidney stones, and she just despises them. She didn't have kidney stones until she went through menopause, and she started having
I
kidney
think
stones.
about 14 BB-sized like gallstones, and my pancreas went to shock. I
Did
don't
they?
know why, but
Oh no!
yeah.
You can't live without your pancreas.
Yeah, I went to shock, and for a whole week they couldn't feed me. I was just in the hospital. They just gave me Demerol every time I woke up because I had very severe stomach pain and also back here. And I was really big, like heavy set. And for a whole week I was out. And I kind of got hooked on Demerol.
Demerol, of course, it's an opiate.
Yeah.
Far out, dude.
And then I finally had my surgery. They took out my gallbladder, my gallstones. They're just cute. But when I got out of the hospital, I was like probably 100 pounds less. Maybe like 70. Yeah, but I was really skinny when I got out.
Oh my goodness gracious, you couldn't eat for a whole week.
They didn't feed me.
They couldn't feed you.
Yeah.
They were afraid they would excite your gallbladder, and then you'd have more, your pancreas would go into shock wars.
Mm-hmm.
So if they fed you, and that's what the gallbladder is for. Did they leave the gallbladder in?
No, took it out.
They took it out. So now you don't digest fat as well as you did.
Yeah.
Did they put you on a diet?
No.
A low-fat diet?
Oh yeah, I like to eat anything that says low fat. Don't drink like whole milk or.
Sure.
So that's why I don't really eat
Yeah.
that much. Only when I met my husband and I ate a lot, but I'm kind of chilling out now.
Chilling.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're chilling
I
out.
noticed that it don't filter your pee, so like if you eat fatty foods, your urine will have like shiny, like I don't know, oil.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, you do because,
Yeah,
see, you can't process it like we can.
Yeah.
We've got gallbladders. And our gallbladder breaks down, well, it's the cholecystokinin that breaks down the fat in your stomach.
Yeah.
But you don't have one.
Mm-mm.
My mother had her gallbladder taken out too. She didn't eat meat after that because she didn't process it very well.
Oh yeah, because I went vegan afterwards.
Yeah.
And I was like very hardcore vegan.
Sure.
Basically didn't really eat anything, like just tofu and.
Well, it's kind of funny because you're not hungry for meat anymore because you can't process it very well.
Yeah.
So you lose your desire to eat it.
But I went like carbs. I started eating a lot of carbs, like bread.
Sure.
And yeah. And
Love
I was living
bread.
with people who, a lady that had celiac disease.
Mhm.
So that was interesting. Eating her her type of foods.
Right.
And,
So you started eating, people with celiac disease, they have a negative reaction in their intestines, especially to fatty foods.
and wheat.
Yeah.
Mainly wheat.
Yeah, they become gluten intolerant, so it gives them diarrhea. Yeah, really bad diarrhea too. That's celiac disease. So they have a lot of problems, a lot of different problems. Caffeine competes with the inhibitor adenosine, thus preventing the inhibitory effect of adenosine. And since adenosine slows things down, if you drink caffeine, it inhibits the inhibiting effect of adenosine, and so you're more excited. Does that make sense? I know, it's kind of bizarre how it works. Caffeine only works on certain people, doesn't work on everybody. It works on most people, but it doesn't work on everybody. Some people, caffeine doesn't affect at all.
Is it, yeah.
Some people, it wakes them right up. They get all excited, get all jittery if they drink too much coffee.
I
No.
get sleepy when I drink coffee. It's the reverse for
You get the
me.
reverse effect, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so
So when I have coffee, I just get sleepier.
it actually puts you to sleep, knocks you out? Okay, so you take it to go to bed.
I don't
Drink
it
that
at
cup of
all.
coffee. and you go to
Last
bed.
night there was a guy at Giant Store and he was getting coffee, the extra Jolt coffee, and it was like 9 o'clock at night. I'm like,
You can't drink that, you'll stay awake all night. Is that what happened? We don't know what happened. Other individuals, it doesn't affect them at all. Like my dad, it doesn't affect me, it doesn't affect my son. So I assume that we are insensitive to caffeine. Calcium channel blockers, like verapamil for high blood pressure, block the calcium channel, and thus they won't allow the activation of the neuron to release the synaptic vesicles. Amphetamines are calcium channel blockers that inhibit the inhibitory neurons that control the release of catecholamines, especially adrenaline, making an individual feel excited and full of energy. That's why amphetamines work. It makes you manic because all of this epinephrine in your system is fired, and it won't allow it to dissipate. So the amphetamines make you excited. Black widow venom causes the over-release of acetylcholine, and eventually you will go into seizures and die. That's why it works. Wait a minute. I'm trying not to go over. Why don't we stop right here and we'll pick this up next time with cocaine and amphetamines.